and thanks Viraj for the nice introduction. I'm Sri Ranjan. I'm from Canada. I'm representing the Canadian National Council of Canadian Tamils. I was the chair of the National Council of Canadian Tamils, and also I'm the co-chair of the International Council of Ilan Tamils, which is organizing this event. To begin this process, I thought I will give you a little bit of background history of our struggle, going back to the history of our people quickly, so that we have put everything in context. I think if you don't look at the history, we will be bound to repeat itself. So that's the rationale for my presentation. So the origin of the Tamils in Ceylon dates back over 3 millennia. And this is the original inhabitants who inhabit the northern and eastern part of the island called Ceylon, which the name was changed, and I am not referring to the name as Sri Lanka because I have a contentious issue as well. Another group of Tamils were brought from southern India during the 1850s to work on the plantations by the British. So that's another group of people living in the south of Sri Lanka island. So pre-colonial map, until the Portuguese arrived in 1505, there was a Tamil kingdom in the north and east, and there were Sinhalese kingdoms in the west and the central part of the island. And then over a period of 450 years, 3 European peoples ruled Sri Lanka, the island. Mainly the Portuguese ruled from 1505 to 1659, and they ruled the Tamil and the Sinhalese kingdoms separately. The last king of Jaffna was defeated in 1619 during the Portuguese rule, and then the Dutch rule began in 1660 and went on till 1796. Again, the Tamil kingdoms and the Sinhalese kingdoms were ruled separately. Then the British arrived. They started in 1796 and they went on till 1948. During the period of the British, in 1833, they basically combined these 2 kingdoms into one for administrative convenience, even though the people were very different. There were 2 nations living in the island of Sri Lanka, or island called Ceylon at the time. Here's a little historical note here from it's called the Cleghorn Minute. It says that there are 2 different nations from very ancient period have divided between them the position of the island. First, the Sinhalese inhabiting the interior of the country in its southern and western parts, and secondly, the Malabars or the Tamils who possess the northern and eastern districts. These 2 nations differ entirely in their religion, language, and manners. So basically, there are 2 groups of people, 2 nations occupying this island. Then 1948, the British left. When they left Ceylon, it was a secular state comprising of the Sinhalese-speaking people who are 90% Buddhist and about 10% Christian, and the Tamils who are about 50% Hindus, 30% Christian, and about 20% Muslim at that period. 3 official languages were proclaimed. That was Sinhalese, Tamil, and English, and for all practical purposes, most of the business happened in English. So it was not an issue for many of the people. The people, Tamil people who are living in the north and east of the island do not speak the other language. They only speak English. And the English was the main linked language. And all the university education, secondary school education, everything was in English for a long time. There was also legal safeguards for the protection of the Tamil people in the constitution that was enacted in 1948. Then once the British left, the planned genocide began. Under a unitary state, obviously you have a numerically superior number in the parliament. The Sinhalese politicians could pass any law that they want, and one party tried to outbid the other party by making more and more discriminatory laws in the parliament. As a result, they used the word democracy, I'm saying within quotes, to successively erode the powers of the Tamil people and started colonizing the traditional Tamil homeland in the east. And then begins the 66-year history of state violence. So 6 decades of genocide started in 1948, soon after coming to get the independence. The 1 million Tamils who are in the estate sector, they were disenfranchised. In other words, they were not able to vote. Basically, they became stateless. So that was in direct violation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 15. Then 1949, Sinhalese colonization of the East began with development work. 1952, the first election, the Buddhism was made state religion. 1956, the other party wanted to come to power, so they had to use another weapon, and they made Sinhala the only official language of the country, thereby shutting out most of the Tamil people who were holding positions in the government. That was in direct violation of Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. 1956, over 150 Tamils were hacked to death in the Galloya development scheme in the east, where most of the colonization had already started. So this is the process of genocide that's beginning around that period. Now, our Tamil politicians, of course, were staging Gandhian-style Satyagraha campaigns, but unfortunately, that didn't go well because the government didn't care about the non-violent methods, so they beat them up and threw them in the moat surrounding the parliament. 1958, there was a pogrom in which over 300 Tamils were hacked to death. Tens of thousands of Tamils were made refugees and sent to the north and east, and Tamil-owned property worth millions was set on fire, including my own home, my parents' home. Tamils barred from the university education. 1970s, they began what's called the ethnic standardization, in which the Tamils had to score 30% more marks than the Sinhalese, and the only way to identify who is a Tamil and who is a Sinhalese was to actually force the Tamils to study in Tamil and force the Sinhalese to study in Sinhalese. Thereby you can create this division. So thereafter, everybody who writes their answers in Tamil will be a Tamil and they will be put a quota. That's how it started. Now this is in direct violation of Article 26 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which guarantees equal access based on merit, but that was not the case in Ceylon. In 1977, another pogrom was unleashed on the Tamils. During this period, actually, the thugs who came, they came with the electoral list, and my home in the Central Hills was attacked again. My parents lost all their belongings during that time. I was caught in that same violence too. I barely escaped because I could speak the other language. Over 40,000 Tamils were made homeless and sent to the north and east. And this is in direct violation of Article 3 and 7 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So you can see, every article of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights has been violated since its inception, but we are still talking about asking the government of Sri Lanka to investigate itself. Then the process of erasing the Tamil identity began. 1972, a new constitution was proclaimed in which the Tamils did not participate. The government unilaterally changed the name from Ceylon to Sri Lanka, which the Tamil people refused to accept. So when I talk, I will not say the word Sri Lanka because I don't buy that argument. Because Sri Lanka is a name that is given by the Sinhalese people to call the entire island. The declaration of the Sri Lanka as the island as a republic actually severed all ties to the British monarchy. As a result, any vestiges of protection given to the Tamil people in the former constitution was completely made null and void. 1974, the International Association of Tamil Research Conference took place in Jaffna, in which there were many people gathered to listen to the speakers. It was a research conference extolling the greatness of Tamil language, but the government was jealous and they sent the police to disturb the meeting. That resulted, 10 people died and 100 people were injured. And this is again going against the Article 20, which guarantees freedom of speech and freedom of peaceful assembly, and Tamils don't have that in Sri Lanka, and back in 1974. Then 1977, things changed. The Tamil political action, mainly non-violent, up until that time, was met by government violence. Until that time, most of the time, it was organized by the government behind the scenes. Most of the armed forces were, 99% of the armed forces were Sinhalese, and as a result, they were able to control everything by brute force. Turning point was 1976. The Tamil political parties got together and created a resolution called the Vattukotta Resolution, asking for an independent Tamil state to be formed if they were elected. So basically, they said 30 years of multiple pacts were all torn to pieces. Nothing is coming from negotiation. Nothing is coming through non-violent means. So they had to have the last election as the voting mechanism to determine the future of the Tamil people. So as a result of that, in the 1977 election, 82% of the voters living in the north and east of the island ratified the formation of the Tamil Eelam as an independent state. Around the same time, the government proclaimed the Prevention of Terrorism Act. It's a draconian law where anybody could be arrested and is still in use today. Over 20,000 people are languishing in jail from that period onwards, and this Prevention of Terrorism Act is in violation of Article 9, 10 and 11 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Many thousands of Tamil youths were arrested, tortured, and many of them have disappeared. This law is still in use today. The ethnic cleansing was carried out with impunity, and you can see the dark shadow areas are parts that were occupied by Tamil people before. Now, since then, it has been taken over by the Sinhalese and it's transformed. And if you see the dark grey part in Puttalam, in the western part, it shows most of the people who are there actually were originally Tamil because they closed the schools, Tamil schools. They learned Sinhalese and they became Sinhalese, assimilated into the Sinhalese language over a period of several generations. This is a beautiful picture of the Tamil library, a public library that was housed in Jaffna, which had a lot of artifacts that was given to them and ranked one of the best in South Asia. This was actually burnt in 1981 after another election. And the police actually helped burn the thing by preventing the people from putting out the fire. So Tamil students lost faith. By 1976, they began to form militant movements, and according to the 1983 violence, there were a series of violence, but 1983 was a major pogrom in which many people were killed, and many of the Tamils again moved to the north. So this was kind of the turning point, and this is what the president at the time came on the radio and said, "I am not worried about the opinion of the Jaffna people. Now we cannot think of them, not about their lives or their opinion. The more you put pressure in the north, the happier the Sinhala people will be here. Really, if I starve the Tamils out, the Sinhala people will be happy." This is president of the country addressing the nation 1 week after thousands of people were rendered homeless. So this is the kind of situation we have, and it's mainly as a result of the mono-ethnic mindset. So how can Eelam Tamils trust the Sinhalese leaders in the south? So Eelam Tamils actually have the right to defend themselves. In fact, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says, whereas it is essential if a man is not to be compelled to have recourse as a last resort to rebellion against tyranny and oppression, that human rights should also be protected by the UDHR. That's exactly what happened. So the Tamil people took up arms. So the birth of the Tamil liberation movement started with many small splinter groups. Eventually, the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam emerged as a formidable force, and they basically became the sole representative of the Tamil people. And they gained control of the north and east of the island and established civil administration in those areas. As a result, a memorandum of understanding was signed in 2002 with a ceasefire monitoring mission by Scandinavian countries was positioned in Sri Lanka, and a direct dialogue between the government of Sri Lanka and the LTTE began under the facilitation of the Norwegian government. Ceasefire agreement actually said they recognized forward defense lines that has to be maintained by the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam as well as the government, and neither party shall engage in any offensive military operation, nor shall move munitions, explosives or military equipment into the area controlled by the other party. One big flaw in this particular accord was, while the Tamil side was not allowed to import arms to keep up, the government, as a government, was able to import arms. So the parity of equality status was quickly declining because the government was arming itself, whereas the Tamil side could not arm itself. On the contrary, the Western governments which brought this ceasefire agreement covertly helped the government of Sri Lanka and the Indian government to bomb the Tamil ships and the fighting capability of the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam. In fact, when two parties are negotiating as equal partners, one side should not have been affected in that way. In fact, what happened later on is a direct result of this kind of disparity. So over the period of 2002 to 2005, they agreed to dissolve the high security zones by February 2002, and A subcommittee on immediate humanitarian rehabilitation needs was supposed to be formed by February 2002. Northeast Reconstruction Fund was to be given by 2002 November. An interim self-governing authority was supposed to be formed by October 2003. And tsunami happens in 2004. And a post-tsunami operational management structure was created, supposed to be created for 2005. But none of these were implemented. None of these that was agreed was all broken. Then as a result, back in 2005, the President Mahinda Rajapaksa was elected. His campaign promises were no recognition of Tamil homeland or right to self-rule, no to federal solution, no to international mediation. So this is his election cry. A majority of the Sinhalese people elected him as president, giving him a mandate to carry on. And he was also supported by the extremist Buddhist Reform Party, JHU, which actually was against the Norwegian government for mediating. So you can see the Norwegian flag being burnt here. Here is the plight of the Tamil people. The government began to bomb, even though the ceasefire was in force. Houses were being bombed, people were being made homeless, they are migrating to places, and they were displaced into jungles like this, in internally displaced camps that were exposed to the elements. Here is the environmental damage. Coconut palms and palmyra palms take several decades to come to maturity. Each one of these, the fronds have been destroyed by the army by firing them as target practice. So this is severe environmental damage of the Tamil Eelam area, land area. There is also a targeted killing of Tamil children. Chenchole, there was a massacre that happened again during the ceasefire period. The Air Force bombed 2006. 67 schoolgirls and 7 teachers were killed. Basically, the response from the government was there is nothing wrong in killing future child soldiers. This is the government responding to that incident. In 2008, the Sri Lanka Accord breaks. Basically, the government withdrew from the Indo-Lanka, the Norwegian signed peace treaty. Hospitals and schools were bombed, churches were bombed, and basically international community watched in silence. Even though Eelam Tamils all over the world protested and brought these to the attention of the world, nobody listened. Basically, over the time, Mullivakal became the crescendo in 2009. Over 70,000 people have been massacred, 146,000 unaccounted for. More than 20,000 former Tamil fighters who surrendered have been taken into custody, but we don't know what happened to them. Over 350,000 people were corralled into concentration camp-like conditions. So these are all in violation of Article 5 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So Tamils can't even rest in peace, even after death. You can see here on the top photograph, what you see is the Viswamadu Hero Cemetery, photographed in November 27, 2007. Soon after, in 2010, 2009, after the Mullivakal incident, when the government took over, they bulldozed the entire cemetery and they banned people from mourning at the cemeteries. No human being, no society will ever desecrate cemeteries. The Tamil people even can't mourn, they are dead. In 2011, the government unleashed grease devils. These are men applying grease to themselves so they can be caught. They went on the prowl with the help of the army and started abusing Tamil women who are alone. There are over 90,000 Tamil widows in the north. So people are not safe in their own homes. So fate of the Tamils, mainly over 1 million people out of 4 million people migrated, fled the country, and over 500,000 internally displaced. Over 300,000 Tamils have been killed over the pogroms that happened in 58, 62, 77, 83, 95, 96, 99, 2000, 2005, 2006, 7, 8, 9, and then now. Continuing on. Tamil homes and agricultural lands have been taken over. My own ancestral home is occupied by the army for the last 30 years. Government has brought now the families of the army soldiers and they're cultivating these lands. And they're dumping the produce at a reduced rate in the market so that the Tamil farmers can survive. So this is economic destruction of the local population. So a wholesale genocide. Genocide means not only killing the livelihood, making life impossible. So keeping them at subsistence levels will keep them from asking for their rights. This is the ploy of the government. And here is a comparison of Kosovo versus Tamilulam. This is available on the web. You can see what happened in Kosovo versus what happened in Tamilulam. The Kosovars, with only a few in number, 2 million, they gained independence without any problem because the West supported them. Whereas the Tamil people with 4 million people and over 80,000 people have been killed. In comparison, the Kosovars, 10,000 were killed. Yet, our plight was never heard. We are not sitting on top of oil. Maybe we are not important. Also, another reason, Tamils are not represented in the UN anywhere because no single country is for the Tamils anymore. Or not ever. Yet, at least. So, there's nobody to speak for us. So, what the Ilan Tamil nation wants is a UN-sponsored independent investigation into 6 decades of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. We don't want a resolution that doesn't even say the word Tamil in it. It is not a minority issue. It is a one nation swallowing another nation, destroying another nation. This is what's happening. And the current resolution in front of the UNHCR doesn't recognize that fact. We also need an interim UN protection mechanism to stop the genocide that is happening in Tamilulam. We also want a UN-sponsored referendum to assess the will of the Ilan Tamils, both within the island and also in the diaspora, so that we can live in peace. So 66 years of systematic genocide leaves the Ilan Tamils with no other choice. Thank you very much.
A very good morning to you all. My name is Gajendra Kumar Ponnambalam. I am the president of the Tamil National People's Front, which is a Tamil political party based in the Tamil homeland in Sri Lanka. I'm also a former member of parliament for 8 years, since right up till 2010. I think the purpose of my intervention will be to restrict my comments purely to what's happening on the ground at the moment and what our expectations are with regards to processes that should take place in places like the UN Human Rights Council. And all what I say comes from a perspective of needing, action being taken to have a distinctive change on the ground, a positive change on the ground. That is the only criteria by which, as far as the Tamil people are concerned, we should judge whether any particular act that is being done on our behalf is a positive step, or whether it is a negative step, or whether quite simply it is irrelevant to us. Yeah. So as far as what's happening on the ground, I think Professor Sri Ranjan went into great detail with regards to the history. If we take the immediate past, if we look at what happened during the war, I think we all know the sort of horrendous crimes that have taken place. The fact that war crimes and crimes against humanity have taken place is not something that is being contested. I don't think no party today will contest the fact that war crimes and crimes against humanity took place against the Tamil people. We, as people who lived in the land and who actually faced it and who are witnesses to what actually happened, take the very firm position that this goes beyond mere war crimes and crimes against humanity, and that it is a systematic genocide that took place and is ongoing. Yeah. And when we use the term genocide, I'm not talking about purely the loss of life. That happened. During the war, there were several incidents of genocide that we believe can be proved. Some of us here are witnesses to that. I personally am a witness to that. But we also believe that when we use the term genocide, it is not merely the loss of lives, but also the very systematic dismantling of the Tamils as a nation. Yeah? It is that identity of a nation that is being systematically dismantled. The loss of life is just one aspect of that nationhood that is being dismantled. So what do we mean by this nationhood? What are the criteria that is relevant to qualify for nationhood? If a people who have a distinct identity, a distinct language, a distinct culture, who live in an identifiable territory, who have their own indigenous economy that can sustain their way of life, when such a people have these composite criteria, they qualify for nationhood. And when you qualify for nationhood, you legally also qualify for the right to self-determination. That is the cornerstone of people's right to self-determination. That certain people qualify for the ability to be able to govern themselves, to have the ability to exercise sovereignty. As far as the Sinhalese nation is concerned, the fact that the Tamils exist in the island of Sri Lanka with these relevant criteria that make us qualify for nationhood is a problem for their own ideology. Sinhala Buddhist nationalism has always viewed the entire island as a Sinhala Buddhist country. It sees the existence of the Tamils that can qualify for nationhood and therefore self-rule as a threat to that very identity of Sri Lanka being a Sinhala Buddhist country. And systematically over the last several decades, they have been systematically trying to dismantle that identity. So it is not just merely killing. They dismantle it by undermining the economy. They dismantle it by carrying out land grabs. They dismantle it by making sure that a Sinhalization project is taken forward in what is essentially Tamil areas. All of those, each of those pillars that make us qualify for nationhood is being undermined and destroyed. That is what is happening right now. Right? So just because the war has stopped 5 years ago and the tremendous loss of life has greatly reduced, that does not mean that the conflict has stopped. It's actually ongoing. And if you actually look at what's happening in Sri Lanka at the moment, land grabs is at a pace. Everyone, we might come from different political backgrounds, we might come from different political viewpoints, but we are all in agreement with regards to what is happening. There is not a single Tamil political party, regardless of our differences politically, who will come here and tell you that our identity is being systematically destroyed even today. Right? So that is the reality. Now when we look at the international community, we expect this reality to be brought to a stop. That is what is relevant. That is what is needed. Yeah? And for those actors that actually committed these crimes to be brought to book. When we talk in terms of accountability, we believe that that is fundamental. Yeah? So from a perspective coming from the ground, firstly, we expect that at the UN, there must be a call for an independent international investigation, at the very minimum, that looks into not only the crimes of war crimes and crimes against humanity, but also genocide. Yeah, we are asking for an investigation of these crimes. I mean, I don't think there should be any problem with regards to investigating these crimes. The only way we can actually find out as to what actually happened is to be prepared to go in and actually understand what really took place. The fact that if we are going to start restricting, even with regards to the sort of investigations that must take place, I think there is something radically wrong. Yeah, so an international independent investigation that looks into the crimes of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide, we believe is fundamental. The second aspect is with regards to how are we going to get that evidence out. Today, as far as the Tamil people are concerned, there is no safe environment for people to actually come out and talk. There are few individuals, like maybe us in this podium and who attend the Human Rights Council, who are prepared to take grave risks. But the reality is that the evidence vests in the people, and it is in that soil. And if you want to get at the truth, you have to create an environment that is safe for that evidence to be gathered. And we believe that that can only happen through a formation of a transitional administration that is in the hands and that is essentially taken control of by the UN or any other international body that has the capacity to provide that sort of protection. If that does not happen, you're not going to be able to get that evidence out. So if you're talking about accountability, the environment in order to get the evidence out is crucial. Yeah. Now, when that is actually the expectations on the ground, there is a resolution that is being tabled in the UN Human Rights Council as we speak. That resolution, very unfortunately, does not address these issues. If we look at the way in which that resolution is actually addressing the conflict, the word Tamil, as Professor Sriranjan has already mentioned, is not even mentioned. Yeah? So who are the targets? The targets are religious minorities, we are told. It's not Tamil. It's not an ethnic conflict. It is religious minorities. There has never been a religious minority problem as such. It has always been an ethnic problem. It has always been an issue where the Sinhala nation has been systematically undermining and trying to destroy the identity of the Tamils as a nation. That has always been the accepted conflict. This resolution doesn't talk about that. Yeah. Secondly, when we have always recognized, and I don't think there is anyone anywhere that will say that war crimes and crimes against humanity did not take place, that is the sort of offenses that has to be looked at. This resolution does not talk of any of that. This resolution talks of human rights violations and related crimes. Yeah, there is a big difference. And thirdly, once again, this resolution gives a tremendous importance to the government itself to investigate itself. To call for an investigation to be conducted by the High Commissioner's office, in our view, falls well short of the sort of accountability mechanisms that are required. Yeah. So the worry here is that as the resolution stands in its current draft, the real concern that we have is that we are going to have another year and another report, as opposed to actually having genuine movement on the ground that will have a positive impact and that will prevent or to in some way deter the Sri Lankan government from carrying out the sort of actions that they have been carrying out. So as far as I am concerned and as far as our party is concerned, we believe the Human Rights Council is a legitimate venue. We have in fact been campaigning that the resolutions must be brought in the Human Rights Council and in fact must go beyond. We also are fully aware that the Council has severe limitations. That's why we say that it has to go beyond. There has to be a will that is created to go beyond, right? So there is no question with regards to the fact that we want a resolution being passed. The issue is with regards to the mandate that is going to be given with that resolution. And if that mandate as it stands is going to be what it eventually passes on whatever date that passes, we believe that it is so weak that it will embolden the current regime to carry on with its actions. It will create a sense of impunity that is so great, that people like us will not even be allowed to come here the next year. Yeah. So the urgency is there, and I say this with utmost responsibility. At the rate at which the identity of the Tamil nation is being dismantled, if we continue with this rate for the next 2 to 3 years, there is absolutely no point in us coming back here. So that is the sense of urgency with which we want to see changes being made. We believe that the time has not passed. There is still a few days that we can use to strengthen this resolution to a point where it actually is relevant and that it actually can make a difference. If that does not happen, then all this resolution is going to do is embolden a government that is already on the rampage and is going to weaken to an unbelievable level the capacity of the Tamil people to resist. Thank you very much.
Been told that there may be people who might have to leave soon, right? So I would suggest have 10 minutes break for questions, right? Immediate questions from people who actually have to leave. I mean, I realize that the press conference has only started and there's a lot more speakers and we are going to continue this. So the people who can stay, please stay. But the people who have urgently got to go, ask their questions immediately, 10 minutes only, please. Yeah? Thank you. Anybody who want to ask an urgent question? If not, we will carry on. Yeah? Somebody.
Yeah. Why, for having the public opinion supporting your cause, you only focus on the UN and you do not focus on the world of tourism, which is now going to give a tremendous support to the winners and where there is still a lot of lobbying to be developed.
Is anybody want to answer it quickly?
From the diaspora, we have been organizing boycott Sri Lanka campaign. We have been urging people to boycott Sri Lanka, but I think our story has not been heard in the public domain much. So because of that, many people really don't know. In fact, it is preposterous that soon after 2009, there were a large number of German tourists went to Sri Lanka because it was so cheap. Right? So it is very disheartening. But unfortunately, we need a lot of effort from all the mainstream press to highlight these events. So it is you all who has to help us bring the story out. Many people really don't know. I am actually surprised. Every time I travel on the plane, who is seated next to me, they ask me where I am going and tell them the reason. They are surprised that there is even trouble. They think everything is fine right now. Because it's not live. Nobody is getting killed. But unfortunately, killing is not only genocide, right? What is happening now is far worse. There's no killing. But people are losing land, livelihoods. We are being destroyed. But this story has to be brought out. I wholeheartedly agree with your point. We need to target economic impact.
Yeah. If I come in very briefly, I am from Britain, and I would say there is a major campaign to normalise the situation in Sri Lanka in the sense of normalising the military occupation of the north and east, and tourism and sport both play a major part in this normalisation strategy. So, for example, there are fundraising efforts going on in the UK for cricket academies, which are being presented as being a venue for reconciliation between young Sinhalese and young Tamils. But these cricket academies are actually being put on Tamil land, and they are actually behind them is the military. So they're using the goodwill of sportsmen and sportswomen, including English cricket heroes and members of the Sri Lankan cricket team. But again, this is the soft face, actually, of a military occupation. I have spoken to tourist colleagues of mine who have been to Sri Lanka, and they are seeing one view. They are kept well away from the occupation areas, from the realities of curfew for Tamil women, of the rapes and the imprisonments and so on. So I appreciate the question and the motivation behind it. I think it is completely up to the international community outside the state system to mobilize very firmly public opinion to isolate Sri Lankan regime in very much the same way as the apartheid regime in South Africa was isolated on this point. We should be calling for a complete boycott of tourism and sporting links with Sri Lanka.
The next, I would like the next speaker. Question also, right? You can also do it, but actually you're also the next speaker, so you're able to answer the question and also speak at the same time.
Thank you very much. My name is Kumaravadivel Guruparan. I am a lecturer in law at the University of Jaffna, Sri Lanka, currently on study leave reading for my PhD in law in London. I am also a founder member of the Tamil Civil Society Forum in Sri Lanka, which is a network of 100 plus civil society activists from the northeast of Sri Lanka. Now, I want to make some preliminary remarks before I talk about the resolution itself. Now, Mr. Ponnambalam has already given you a sort of synopsis in terms of why the Tamils might feel that this resolution does not reflect their interest. Now, before I get into the substantive questions as to why the Tamils feel so, or why members at least on this podium feel so, let me say a few things about what our criticism is about and what it is not about. Now, there are those who would like us to think, and I think this is part of a systematic smear campaign, who suggest that to be critical about this resolution is to be pro-government of Sri Lanka. I think that is the most cynical and convoluted thing that can be said of people who are very responsible in terms of their commitment to the Tamil people's cause, who have stood up, criticized not only this government, but successive governments in the way in which they have conducted what we consider to be the genocide of the Tamil people and an ongoing genocide. And to suggest that to be critical of the resolution is to be pro-government is deeply offending and something that the Tamils do not take easily. The second thing which falls out from that first statement that I made that I want to make clear is that just because the government of Sri Lanka is also against this resolution is not the reason why the Tamils should be for this resolution. That's not an easy equation that you can translate Tamil support for anything to be about. This is something that is also made out about the 13th Amendment of the Provincial Council system, a completely useless system of quote-unquote devolution of powers that you find within the Constitution of Sri Lanka. They say that the current government of Sri Lanka does not intend to provide all powers under the 13th Amendment, and hence the Tamil should be asking for those powers to be implemented and should subscribe to the 13th Amendment as a basis for solution. We believe that Tamil positions as with regard to what their substantive political position should evolve from a consideration of what the Tamil issues are, what Tamil people are facing, and based on an analysis is a way in which we prescribe what solutions would address those problems. So if the problem is one of ongoing genocide, of ongoing oppression, of ongoing systematic oppression of the Tamil people, which we call genocide, then we believe that we need to be prescribing solutions that match that diagnosis, and we should not be looking at, Tamil should not be forced to take up positions just binary to the government of Sri Lanka. I think one should allow for space where Tamils take up these positions based on, and this is probably the least that we can do to recognize Tamil self-determination, that the Tamil should be allowed to state, because I'll be very open. We've just had an experience this morning where just because I'm talking about we meaning Mr. Ponnambalam and myself, we were to address a group of states as to our thoughts on the present resolution, and just because we were critical of the resolution, there were people who are supportive of this resolution who kicked us out of that meeting and said we cannot address those states. I mean, that's the kind of space that we are talking about that exists for Tamils within the UN Human Rights Council, and this is a problem. And I think people need to read, people need to give Tamils a space to articulate for themselves as to what they feel the solutions that would address their problem are. Now, this is not to say that we are being unilateral about how we want to proceed with these things. We want to have a dialogue with the international community. We want to have a dialogue with the states. We want to have a dialogue with all concerned. We are neither pro a particular state nor against any particular state. Our position is that we will engage with anyone based on Tamil national interests. And for any Tamil party, any Tamil group, to assume that to go along with what is being suggested by the powers that be is the best way that Tamils are going to be liberated is a complete mistake, we feel. So I think these points need to be kept in mind in terms of how you read the present, how you read the criticism that I'm going to put forward with regard to the resolution. The first thing that I want to acknowledge is that we do understand. I mean, Tamils are sometimes demonized. I mean, not demonized. They are degraded. There is a bit of a condescending approach that they take, that people like us who criticize the resolution don't understand UN mechanisms. We have no experience with how these things work, and that we need to be told as to how these UN mechanisms work. Now, I am always willing to listen. We are always willing to listen to people who would have things to say in terms of concrete action. But the point that I want to make is that we are very well aware of the limitations of UNHRC as a mechanism. Now, we are aware that the UN Human Rights Council, for example, cannot set up a judicial process towards international criminal prosecutions. The only body at the moment within the UN system that can have a judicial process in terms of how you run an international criminal investigations is the International Criminal Court. And we are very well aware that a judicial process with regard to international criminal investigation, meaning the ICC starting a prosecution, will only happen if the UN Security Council refers Sri Lanka to the International Criminal Court, and that can, because that is the only option available, because Sri Lanka, as Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe and the current opposition leader keep saying, Sri Lanka boasts about, during his time when he was asked to sign up to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, they refused to sign up to it. And mind you, Sri Lanka was asked to sign up to the Rome Statute. I mean, the demand was there to sign up to the Rome Statute during the so-called peace process time. So if you were involved in a peace process, and if you were serious about a peace process, genuine about a peace process, why is this so-called democratic star of the Sri Lankan establishment now? I mean, people are talking about how Ranil Wickremesinghe would do things differently. Why did he not sign up to the ICC statute in 2003? Anyway, but coming back to the point, we are very clear. We are not aware of the fact that the UN Human Rights Council can, the maximum contribution that the UN Human Rights Council can make is to call for an investigation either through a directly appointed commission of inquiry, or through the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to set up a standalone investigation, or for the Office of the High Commissioner herself to appoint relevant experts in the field to come up with an investigative report. Now, what is going to be produced, whether it's a COI, whether it's a standalone investigation of the High Commissioner's office, or whether it's an investigation that is led by the High Commissioner's office itself, is a report. Is a report that is going to say, as if we don't have enough to say. I mean, probably there is more that a report can say. But let's not forget that the UN Secretary General's panel of expert report has come up with conclusions as to what has happened in Sri Lanka. We've had the US State Department actually produce a report in terms of what they think happened during the last phase of the war. We have the UN Secretary General having appointed Charles Petrie to look into the UN's own conduct during the last phase of the war, which has revealed a lot of details. We have the Permanent People's Tribunal. I know that a lot of eyebrows will go up as to the credibility of the PPT, but we believe that people's organizations are also important in terms of how these things unravel. There is a Permanent People's Tribunal where serious experts of international law have gone into the question of what has happened in Sri Lanka and have even concluded genocide recently. So there are a number of reports that are there already. Now, so the argument is made that these are not legitimate, that these are not produced by legitimate actors, and that somehow the High Commissioner's report would be considered to be legitimate by the international community per se, and hence you can increase the momentum towards international investigation. Now, I'm not saying that that might not happen, but the question that we have, as Mr. Ponnambalam stressed at the beginning, is that the point of departure of our analysis of what this resolution would contribute towards is not just about what happens to past violations, it's about how we are contributing towards change, at least at a very minimum level, to the systemic oppression that our people are undergoing at the moment. How is this resolution, I ask, going to respond to problems of people like Jayakumari? Now, Jayakumari and Vibhushika, mother and daughter, are campaigners for their disappeared son. Jayakumari's husband was killed in the war. Her sons lost their lives in the liberation struggle. And now she has a son who has disappeared during the last stages of the war. She has been campaigning actively for her release. Now, the government of Sri Lanka is portraying a picture of Jayakumari as a part of a big process of regrouping. Now, the question that we ask is, I mean, I can get into the details if there are questions about Jayakumari's case. The questions that we have is, Jayakumari is just one example of many number of Tamils who are lingering in prison. And for us, people who face the trauma of the people, who interact with people who go through this oppression on a daily basis, the question that we ask is, what is the solution that is being presented, at least an indicative solution that is being presented by the present resolution in terms of their lives being any different? In the next year to come, as the High Commissioner deliberates over what investigation needs to be done, calls upon witnesses, I'm sure the Sri Lankan government won't allow the High Commissioner to come inside the state. The High Commissioner will try to conduct an investigation outside. What is going to change in terms of what is happening? Now, as the resolution itself is being debated, we see a situation where the Tamil people are being targeted, and other civil society activists also who worry about Tamil issues are being targeted. Now, I'm quite sure of this, that particularly when even Sinhalese civil society activists, people who are who belong to the South, take up matters with regard to Tamil issues, they are branded as people who contribute to communal disharmony. This was what was suggested when Ruki Fernando was arrested along with Father Praveen quite recently, that their campaign for the Tamil people's human rights issues, the oppression of the Tamil, is contributing to communal disharmony, because to talk about Tamil rights and Tamil issues leads to communal disharmony. This is how the state has done it. It's the same thing that happened in Journalist Thisanayakam, where Journalist Thisanayakam wrote a piece saying that the Tamil people are being deprived of necessary supplies, and that's how the war is being staged in the East in 2006. He was charged with contributing to communal disharmony and sentenced for 20 years and then released on a quote-unquote presidential pardon after some intervention, late intervention on the part of the international community. So the question that we ask is, how are things going to change? I'm not saying that the resolution needs to do wonders. We are not naive people who would expect resolutions to do wonders. The question is whether it's at least taking stock of what is happening, and that is where we have problem in terms of the narrative. Now, why do we have problems with the narrative? You take the, I mean, it's been already mentioned. I call this a de-Tamilization of the Sri Lankan narrative. Now, I must say that the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Navi Pillai, has been very good, has done some very good progressive work with regard to certain aspects on the Sri Lankan question. Now, for example, her conclusion in her report recently submitted on the 17th of February to the UN Human Rights Council, that the problem with regard to Sri Lanka, with regard to accountability, is not one of technical capacity of the Sri Lankan government to launch accountability, to launch an accountability process, but it is an issue of political will, is very, very important. But even the High Commissioner makes a dichotomization of accountability and reconciliation being two different things. She thinks that with regard to accountability there needs to be an international inquiry process, but with regard to reconciliation, her suggestion, after acknowledging that there hasn't been much done with regard to implementation of the recommendation of the so-called wonderful Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission report, is to further suggest, like the present resolution does, that please implement the recommendations of the LLRC. It's still relying on the Sri Lankan government to say, implement the LLRC, implement the LLRC, implement the LLRC. So even if people are to argue that this resolution in some way makes a shift on the accountability question, that there needs to be some international oversight or international involvement towards accountability process. This, after making this so-called dichotomization between accountability and reconciliation, I say dichotomization because I think reconciliation, if ever possible, is deeply linked with accountability. Both the resolution and the High Commissioner's report still says that the domestic process can be trusted towards doing that. That's deeply problematic. That narration is deeply problematic. And to leave out now again a problem with both the resolution and the High Commissioner, after a visit to Sri Lanka, identified the problem in Sri Lanka as one of authoritarianism, as one of lack of rule of law, lack of good governance. Now, I don't have a doubt that these are true. But the problem is that narrative misses out the fact that when it comes to the Tamil people in particular, in specific, the problem is that it is about structural issues. It's about the Sri Lankan state. It's a 60-year, 30-year question, and we've heard enough from Professor Sriranjan in terms of the historical material that supports his argument. There is a complete denial of the fact that some of the issues that are faced by the Tamil people are much more structural nature. It is not about this recent authoritarian turn that was taken. It is not about this recent rule of law collapse post-war by this particular regime. It is not the question of just a simple collapse of good governance, but a more fundamental question with regard to the character of the state. Now this, the resolution, all three resolutions so far failed to acknowledge. So you have a trajectory in the international human rights process as mediated by the UN Human Rights Council that doesn't want to take cognizance of this process, right? Now, let me also turn now to the final point that I want to make, which is that this resolution talks about the political solution that the Tamils, that need to take shape in Sri Lanka. Now, operative paragraph 6. Now, for those of you I'm just mentioning, if you look at, I've skimmed through this, but if you look at preamble paragraph 13 and 14 of the current resolution, preamble paragraph 13 gives you a list of the problems. Nowhere is it mentioned that Tamils particularly have a problem. Yesterday we heard from Yasmin Suka as to how this is a systematic targeting of the Tamil people, who was on the panel of experts report. The resolutions don't want to acknowledge it, right? We heard Yasmin Suka from a side event of the UN Human Rights Council. Now paragraph 14, however, talks about recent attacks on religious minorities, and we heard, for example, a Western country in an informal discussion on the draft resolution actually say that the Muslims are the main target now, the Christians are second, and third are Hindus. The Tamils are completely lost of the narrative and maybe are fitted into this whole dimension of Tamils being Hindus, which is a complete convoluted take of what is the problem in Sri Lanka. This is a major issue. Now I want to come back to what I started on, which is the political solution. If you look at operative paragraph 6 of the resolution, it's calling upon the government of Sri Lanka to help the Northern Provincial Council to function effectively in line with the 13th Amendment of the Constitution of Sri Lanka. The Tamils have taken a consistent stance, including the Tamil National Alliance, I must say, and the mandate given by the Tamil people to the Northern Provincial Council in the recently held election of September 2013, clearly the mandate was based on the manifesto of the TNA and based on the speeches that were delivered from electoral platforms where people gathered in mass numbers to listen to TNA members of parliament call for a vote for the Northern Provincial Council. That call for vote was a clear rejection of the 13th Amendment. Now for the resolution now to say that the Northern Provincial Council, for it to diagnose that the problem with the Northern Provincial Council is that the 13th Amendment is not implemented, and that the Northern Provincial Council would become effective if the 13th Amendment is that the Constitution is implemented in line with the 13th Amendment, is to suggest that the 13th Amendment in some way can provide for an effective political mechanism to solve the problems of the Tamil people. This is deeply objectionable. Why is it objectionable? I think, and I use these words in utmost responsibility, because if you look at the larger conversation beyond the resolution on a political solution question, and here I'm talking about both India and the US and powers aligned with these two, they have made post-May 2009 the 13th Amendment the centerpiece of the discourse on a political solution. And this resolution is reflecting that. And we say no. You can't force on the Tamil people something that they have rejected, something that has been proven repeatedly as not addressing the problems of the Tamil people as a solution on the Tamil people. And I think operator paragraph 6 is deeply problematic in that sense. One final point. People keep talking about the LLRC. Restoration of normalcy in the Northeast is not going to happen. Is not going to happen unless the PTA is repealed. The Prevention of Terrorism Act is repealed. The recent arrests of both Ruki Fernando, Father Praveen, Jay Kumari, the number of people languishing in jail, the lack of process in PTA towards a real sort of process through which you can demand your rights. As long as the PTA is there, normalcy is not going to be returned. It suffocates space. Along with the Sixth Amendment, it suffocates space for expression of Tamil political opinion in the Northeast. The LLRC doesn't even call for the repeal of the PTA. This resolution, despite, as the debate happens, we've raised it with the states that are bringing this resolution. Despite the fact that arrests are happening in Sri Lanka under the PTA as this resolution is being passed, this resolution doesn't even want to make mention of it. Now people might say, the UN Human Rights Council, you can't tell a state what law to have and what law not to have. But there are a number of prescriptions that you've already made to the Sri Lankan government. Can we not say that the Prevention of Terrorism Act is at least problematic towards achieving quote-unquote reconciliation and accountability and return of normalcy? Even that is not mentioned. So in what way then are the Tamil people to identify with this resolution, or for Tamil representatives to recommend this resolution as the basis for moving towards a solution to their problems? And this is where the question arises. Now this does not mean that the Tamil people learnt a hard lesson in May 2009, if not before, as to what happens if you rely purely on international community processes to solve the problems that you're having. Now we as Tamil representatives are aware that there needs to be much done on the ground towards moving towards resolving the problems of the Tamil people. But if it is being suggested that this is being done for the Tamil people, that this will be good for the Tamil people, our question is, what is the good in this? Explain it to us. And we are saying that in the form that it is, that it doesn't make a change on the ground. Now this doesn't mean immediately the question that is put to us, and I'll finish with this. Are you rejecting the resolution? That is all people are interested in, right? When we criticize the resolution, immediately the only question that people are interested in is, so does this mean that you're rejecting a resolution that has taken so much of pain despite the composition of the council? Problem, China is there, Russia is there, Pakistan is there, they're not going to allow. The only question that they're interested in asking us is as to whether you're rejecting the resolution. I'm saying, let's not get into that yes or no answer binary of how we state Tamil issues. We say that this resolution does not contribute to changing things on the ground. That we can't recommend to the Tamil people saying that you can wait for Geneva to deliver on your problems. This is the other problem. For us, waiting for the international community, that all roads lead to Geneva. This is the other problem within the Tamil community. That our advocacy, look at all diaspora organizations, most of them. Look at the main Tamil political party, Tamil National Alliance. Wait for Geneva. Geneva is going to do wonders. No. We have a responsibility. The Tamil Civil Society Forum has taken the difficult responsibility of trying to manage the expectations of our people, that is both created by international actors and by our own representatives and by our own diaspora organizations. So it's my appeal to political parties, particularly the Tamil National Alliance and these mainstream diaspora organizations, that unless we take a critical stance in terms of what is happening in Geneva, and unless we move away from the approach that all roads lead to Geneva, in terms of how Tamil problems are going to be looked at, we are not going to identify the alternatives. So finally, on this question that people might raise, if not for this resolution, what is your alternative? I say, if we approach the resolution critically, and if people are made to understand what the resolution is about, at least the space for identifying the alternative will come about. It is that creation of that space for looking for alternatives that I am arguing for, and that will come about only by taking stock, a realistic, pragmatic, honest take of what the resolution is. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would like to go on now immediately, but I would actually ask the speakers to try to keep their contributions shorter, because the time is a problem now. Yeah. So the next speaker is Mr. Shivagjalingam.
வணக்கம். என்னுடைய பெயர் சிவாஜிலிங்கம். 2001ஆம் ஆண்டிலிருந்து 2010ஆம் ஆண்டு வரை பாராளுமன்ற உறுப்பினராக இருந்தவன். தற்பொழுது வடக்கு மாகாண சபையினுடைய மாகாண சபை உறுப்பினராக இருக்கின்றேன். 40 வருட கால தீவிர அரசியலில் ஆயுத போராட்டத்திலிருந்து இந்திய இலங்கை ஒப்பந்தத்தின் பின்னர் ஜனநாயக அரசியலுக்கு திரும்பியவன். இலங்கை தீவிலே இன்றைக்கு இருக்கக்கூடிய பிரச்சனை பற்றி, ஜெனீவா தீர்மானத்தை பற்றி எங்களுடைய மக்கள் மிகவும் ஆர்வமாக இருக்கிறார்கள்.
My name is Sivajilingam. I am a member of the Tamil National Alliance and also a current elected member of the Northern Provincial Council, a former member of Parliament. I have been involved in Tamil politics for a long time, for the past 40 years. Let me start off by saying that the Tamil people are very interested in what is happening in Geneva.
ஏற்கனவே என்னுடைய நண்பர்கள் பலர் இதை பற்றி கூறியிருக்கிறார்கள். இன்று போர் முடிவடைந்து எங்களுடைய மக்களுடைய துயரம் இன்னமும் தீரவில்லை.
My friends have spoken already, but to emphasize that the war is over, but the agony of our people is not over.
குறிப்பாக இந்த போரிலே 2009ஆம் ஆண்டு முடிவடைந்த போரிலே 1 லட்சத்துக்கு மேற்பட்ட அப்பாவி பொதுமக்கள் கொல்லப்பட்டிருந்தார்கள். பல்லாயிரக்கணக்கானவர்கள் காயமடைந்திருந்தார்கள். பல்லாயிரக்கணக்கானவர்கள் காணாமல் போயிருந்தார்கள்.
In the war that ended in May 2009, more than 100,000 people died. A number of 100,000s got injured. An equal number got disappeared as well.
இந்த சூழ்நிலையிலே தான் அரசாங்கம் நில அபகரிப்பை தீவிரமாக செய்து கொண்டிருக்கிறது.
It is in this context that the state is involved in an accelerated program of land grabbing.
வடக்கிலே வலிகாமத்திலே 6300 ஏக்கரை எங்களுடைய அப்பாவி பொதுமக்களுடைய காணிகளை சுவீகரித்திருக்கிறது ராணுவம்.
In Valigamam North, in the Jaffna Peninsula, the Sri Lankan army has appropriated land belonging to Tamil individuals, Tamil persons, Tamil citizens, amounting to 6,381 acres.
உதாரணத்துக்கு சொன்னால் 750 ஏக்கரிலே கோல்ஃப் மைதானம் ஒன்றை அமைத்திருக்கிறார்கள்.
Out of those 6,381 acres, 750 acres has been used to set up a golf course space for the Sri Lankan army.
இதே போல வன்னி பகுதியிலே முருகண்டியிலே 10,000 ராணுவ குடும்பங்களை குடியேற்றுவதற்கான முயற்சிகளிலே அரசாங்கம் தீவிரமாக ஈடுபட்டிருக்கிறது.
Further, in Vanni, in a place called Tirumurugandi, in Kilinochi, the government is involved in a process of settling down 10,000 army personnel and their families.
இதே போல கிழக்கு மாகாணத்திலே சம்பூரிலே 10,000 ஏக்கர் காணி எங்களுடைய மக்கள் மீள குடியேற அனுமதி மறுக்கப்பட்டிருக்கிறது.
Similarly, in the eastern province in Sambur, over 10,000 acres of land have been appropriated where people are being refused to be resettled.
மட்டக்களப்பு மாவட்டத்திலே வாகரை என்ற இடத்திலே 15,000 ஏக்கர் காணி படை வீரர்களுடைய குடும்பங்களின் குடியேற்றத்துக்காக சுவீகரிக்கப்பட்டு இருக்கிறது.
In Batikalo,
15,000 ஏக்கர்.
More than 15,000 acres of land have been appropriated to create housing project, to implement a housing project for the Sri Lankan armed forces and their families.
இந்த சூழ்நிலையிலே போரினால் பாதிக்கப்பட்டவர்கள் கொல்லப்பட்டவர்களுக்கோ காயமடைந்தவர்களுக்கோ அல்லது பாதிக்கப்பட்டவர்களுக்கோ அரசாங்கத்தினால் எந்த விதமான உதவிகளும் கிடைப்பதில்லை.
There is no livelihood support for those people who have been affected by the war, who have been injured by the war and who have been now quote unquote resettled.
உதாரணத்துக்கு ஒரு காயமடைந்த படை வீரருக்கு மாதாந்தம் 45,000 ரூபாய் வழங்கப்படுகிறது.
An injured soldier of the Sri Lankan army gets rupees 45,000 per month as a handout on the part of the Sri Lankan government.
இந்த சூழ்நிலையிலே தான் எங்களை பொறுத்தளவிலே நாங்கள் கேட்க விரும்புவது, இந்த போரிலே கொல்லப்பட்ட பாதிக்கப்பட்ட மக்களுக்கு சர்வதேச நீதி எங்களுக்கு தேவை.
It is in this context that we ask for international justice for our people.
இதே போல எங்களுக்கு ஒரு அரசியல் தீர்வும் தேவை.
Similarly, we also need a political solution.
குற்றவாளிகள் தண்டிக்கப்பட வேண்டும்.
Those responsible, the perpetrators, have to be punished.
ஆனால் இந்த ஜெனீவா அமெரிக்காவினால் கொண்டு வரப்பட்ட தீர்மானத்திலே அரசியல் தீர்வு பற்றி கூறாமல் 13வது திருத்தம் பற்றி கூறப்பட்டிருக்கிறது.
In the resolution that has been brought forward by America by the United States in the UN Human Rights Council, without talking about a permanent political solution, there is a mere reference to the 13th Amendment.
நாங்கள் இருந்து கொண்டிருக்கக்கூடிய அந்த மாகாண சபையிலே எங்களுடைய முதலமைச்சரால் ஒரு பிரதம செயலாளரை கூட நியமிக்க முடியாத வெட்கங்கெட்ட நிலைமையிலே தான் நாங்கள் இருந்து கொண்டிருக்கிறோம்.
I am a member of the Northern Provincial Council that comes under the 13th Amendment. We have a situation where the Northern Province Chief Minister, the elected Northern Province Chief Minister, is not even able to appoint a person of his own choice as his Chief Secretary.
இந்த சூழ்நிலையிலே தமிழ் மக்கள் 13வது திருத்தத்தின் கீழ் கொண்டு வரப்பட்ட இந்த மாகாண சபைகள் முறைகளை முற்றுமுழுதாக நிராகரித்திருக்கிறார்கள்.
It is important to point out that the Tamil people have rejected absolutely that the 13th Amendment does not provide for a solution to the Tamil people.
இலங்கை தீவு சுதந்திரம் அடைந்த 48 எங்கள் மக்கள் மீது இனப்படுகொலைகள் நடைபெற்றிருக்கிறது.
From 1948 there has been a continuing process of genocide that has been perpetrated against our people.
எனவே எங்களுடைய மக்கள் மீது நடத்தப்பட்ட இனப்படுகொலைகளும் அதே போல மானிடத்துக்கு எதிரான குற்றங்கள், மனித உரிமைகளுக்கு எதிரான குற்றங்கள், போர்க்குற்றங்கள் போன்றன விசாரிக்கப்பட வேண்டும். ஒரு சர்வதேச நீதி ஆணைக்குழுவின் கமிஷன் ஆஃப் இன்குவரி மூலம் நடைபெற வேண்டும் என்பதுதான் எங்களுடைய கோரிக்கை.
So our demand is that the crimes of genocide, war crimes and crimes against humanity need to be investigated through the setting up of an independent, impartial international commission of inquiry.
ஆனால் இன்றைக்கு இருக்கக்கூடிய இந்த தீர்மானத்தை கொண்டு வந்ததற்காக அமெரிக்கா உட்பட ஆதரவு வழங்க இருக்கிறவர்களுக்கு நன்றி தெரிவிக்கின்ற நேரத்திலே இதை மென்மேலும் செழுமைப்படுத்தி சர்வதேச குற்றவியல் நீதிமன்றத்திலே எதிர்காலத்திலே ஐநா பொதுச்சபையின் அங்கீகாரத்துடன் இட்டுச் செல்வது ஒன்றுதான் இலங்கை அரசாங்கத்திலே இலங்கையிலே நீங்கள் நீதியை வழங்குவதற்கு சமமாக இருக்கும் என்பதை நாங்கள் அறுதியிட்டு கூற விரும்புகிறோம்.
While thanking the United States and other sponsors of this resolution for bringing this resolution, we ask that it be further strengthened and enhanced, and we point out that the only way in which accountability and justice is going to be delivered in Sri Lanka is by a referral of the UN Security Council to the International Criminal Court and proper investigations to take place through the International Criminal Court.
முடிவுரையாக ஈழத்தமிழர்களுடைய இறமை 3 விதப்பட்டது.
In conclusion, may I say this, that the sovereignty of the Eelam Tamils takes 3 different forms.
வரலாற்று ரீதியாக, பாரம்பரிய ரீதியாக நாங்கள் போர்த்துகீசர், ஒல்லாந்தர், ஆங்கிலேயர் வருவதற்கு முன்னர் எங்களுக்கு என்று தனி ஆட்சிகள் இருந்தன. அந்த அடிப்படையிலே ஆன இறமை எங்களிடம் இருக்கிறது.
That we have historical sovereignty because pre-colonial times, pre-Portuguese, we had our own state, our own system, and hence from a historical perspective we make a claim to historical sovereignty. That's one.
இன்னொன்று நாங்கள் போராடி பெற்ற இறமை.
The second is the sovereignty that we gained through our liberation struggle.
அது எப்படி என்றால் நாங்கள் அகிம்சை ரீதியான போராட்டங்களை நடத்தி அது தோல்வி கண்ட நிலைமையிலே ஆயுத போராட்டத்தை நடத்தி இறுதி கட்டமாக தமிழீழ விடுதலை புலிகளுடைய தலைமையிலே ஒரு நடைமுறை அரசாங்கம், de facto ஸ்டேட் ஒன்றை நிறுவி நாங்கள் போராடி எங்களுடைய இறமையை பெற்றோம்.
How that happened was we initially the struggle was based on principles of ahimsa or non-violence. Then we converted that struggle, given the failure of the non-violent struggle, into a violent struggle, and the process generated the ground swelling for the claim that we make for sovereignty based on our struggle.
De facto state
and the culmination of that was the establishment of a de facto state by the Liberation Tigers of Tamilam.
அந்த நிலைமைக்கு புறம்பாக மூன்றாவதாக இப்பொழுது இனப்படுகொலையை தடுப்பதற்காக சர்வதேசம் வழங்குகின்ற ஒரு இறமை, பாதிக்கப்பட்ட இனங்களுக்கு வழங்குகின்ற இறமை எங்களுக்கு இருக்கிறது.
And finally, remedial sovereignty, in the sense of as a group, as a ethnicity, as a nation that has been subjected to genocide, that we have the right to be bestowed back with our sovereign rights.
இந்த சூழ்நிலையிலே எங்களுக்கு ஒரு அரசியல் தீர்வு என்பது எங்களுடைய இறமையை காப்பாற்றக்கூடிய விதத்திலே சுயநிர்ணய உரிமையின் அடிப்படையிலே தமிழ் தேசம் என்ற அடிப்படையிலே ரெண்டு தேசங்கள் இணைகின்ற ஒரு அமைப்பாக, ஒரு கூட்டு இணைப்பாட்சியாக, கான்ஃபெடரேஷனாகத்தான் இருக்க முடியும்.
So the solution to the Tamil problem can only be that recognizes the sovereignty of the Tamil people by way of recognition of its right to self-determination, by recognition of a two-nation state where which are brought together in the form of a confederation.
இந்த சூழ்நிலையிலே இதை நாங்கள் பெறுவதற்கு முன்னரே இன அழிப்பு வேகமாக நடைபெற்றுக் கொண்டிருக்கிறது.
To prevent us towards moving to this path, there is an ongoing genocide that is taking place against the Tamil people.
எனவே அதை தடுப்பதற்காக சர்வதேச சமூகம் எங்களுடைய தமிழ் தேசத்திலே ஒரு இடைக்கால சபை ஒன்றை ஐநாவினுடைய மேற்பார்வையிலே நிறுவுவதுதான் எங்களுடைய பிரச்சனைக்கு ஒரு இடைக்கால தீர்வாகவும் ஒரு நிரந்தர தீர்வாகவும் அமைய முடியும் என்பதுதான் ஈழத்தமிழ் மக்களுடைய எதிர்பார்ப்பு.
So to put a stop and a halt to the ongoing genocide, the only way in which that can be done is through the establishment of an interim transitional arrangement through which we protect the Tamil people from the continuing onslaught of genocide.
LLRC என்ற அந்த விடயத்துக்கு ஊடாக இலங்கையை மீண்டும் மீண்டும் விசாரிக்க கோருவது என்பது கொலைகாரனையே நீதிபதியாக நியமிப்பதற்கு ஒப்பானது.
To call upon the government of Sri Lanka to investigate itself through the process of an LLRC is akin to asking a murderer to be a judge himself.
இந்த சூழ்நிலையிலே சர்வதேசத்திடமிருந்து, குறிப்பாக ஐக்கிய நாடுகள் சபையிடமிருந்து, மனித உரிமை பேரவையிடமிருந்து நாங்கள் எங்களுக்கு நீதியும் அரசியல் தீர்வும் கிடைக்க வேண்டும் என்று ஈழத்தமிழ் மக்களாகிய நாங்கள் எதிர்பார்க்கிறோம்.
So we expect the international community and the UN Human Rights Council to provide for a recognition of our right to self-determination and to provide for a solution to the problems that we are facing. That is the expectation of the Tamil people.
போர் முடிவடைந்திருக்கிறதே ஒழிய போருக்கான அடி வேர்கள், ஆணி வேர்கள் நீக்கப்படவில்லை. தொடர்ந்தும் இது ஒரு கொழுந்து விட்டு எரித்து கொண்டிருக்கிறது. ஆகவே இதற்கு சர்வதேச சமூகம் ஒரு முடிவுக்கு கொண்டு வர வேண்டும் என்பதுதான் ஈழத்தமிழர்களாகிய எங்களுடைய பெருவிருப்பம்.
Though it is suggested that the war has ended, the war has not ended. There is a continuing war, and it is a responsibility of the international community to make sure that this continuing war is halted.
நன்றி.
Thank you.
Right. Before we move on to the next speaker, one of the people have asked whether there will be anybody from this panel who will be available on Friday, next Friday, after the resolution has been decided. Will there be anybody who's available to talk to him and to others next Friday? You're there? Okay. Yeah, there's a few people who will be there. So that's the answer to that question. The next speaker.
We can speak via phone or Skype, but you won't be here.
I'll be here.
Some of us can speak from far through phone or Skype, but we won't be here. I won't be here. Yeah, phone will be fine.
Okay. So the next speaker is Krishna, and I would like to also ask him to give a little bit background to where he's coming from, because all the speakers have explained. So the student activity and things like that, his past, so that people understand where he's from. Yeah. Okay.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Krishna Saravanamuthu. I'm an elected representative of the National Council of Canadian Tamils, and I also serve as the spokesperson for the International Council of Canadian Tamils. I come here today to this press conference with the democratic mandate of tens of thousands of Tamil people across the diaspora who voted in independently organized referenda right after the war came to its conclusion in 2009. And the mandate of those referendums was to continue the Tamil struggle peacefully for the establishment of a sovereign, independent, separate state. So having said that, today we've heard a lot about the process of violence that continues 5 years after the war. We've heard about the occupation. We hear about the rape. We hear about the appropriation of land, about the imprisonment of political prisoners. We hear about the denial of civil liberties through the Prevention of Terrorism Act, the deterioration of health, food, and social security. And I would suggest that these issues do not exist in a vacuum. In fact, these issues emerge out of a broader context of failure by the international community to uphold the cardinal principles of international human rights law, of international humanitarian law. And we know this based on the United Nations' own reports. In 2012, the Petrie report, which was published, basically did an internal review of the United Nations activities in Sri Lanka during the last stages of the war. And what we found was absolutely shocking from that report. We know that high-level senior staff of the United Nations were directly involved with suppressing the death count that was coming out at that time. We also know that there was a political decision made to scrutinize the activities of the LTT, disproportionately focus the criticism on the LTT while ignoring any type of real criticism of the government. And this is something that did lay the stage eventually for the massacre that we saw happen in Mullavaikal. Because if the world had known the reality of what was happening at that time, there could be a reasonable argument made that there may have been more done to stop the massacre, to stop the genocide. We know that individuals like Vijay Nambiar, again, high-level UN staff, were involved with this type of political maneuvering. We've heard through the admissions of people like John Holmes, who was the ex-humanitarian affairs chief for the United Nations, that essentially the international community was waiting for the defeat of the LTT, and they hoped that it would happen with the lowest death count possible. And so this kind of fits into a broader discourse, the Tamil Tiger terrorist discourse, which ensures that the government in 2009 had a license to kill. It had a license to kill civilians. It had a license to absolutely disregard the fundamental principles of international humanitarian law. And so this is the context from which we come here today, and from which we seek justice from the international community. But we also are looking at a broader context of what happened during the peace process that the LTT and the government of Sri Lanka were both involved with. The United States was one of the co-chairs of that peace process. And it's rather unfortunate that during that time, the United States was providing Sri Lanka with both material and strategic support to help Sri Lanka with its counterinsurgency campaign. And so there's a clear conflict of interest here. And so we often hear a rhetoric about the LTT not being serious about a negotiated settlement to the conflict, but we wonder how serious the other actors were if they were continuing to prepare the state for war, and we all know how that war eventually came to a conclusion. Today, 5 years after the war, we know that the U.S. Pacific Command has increased joint training with Sri Lanka, and conducting business as usual with a country like Sri Lanka, as if it were a normal country and not a country accused of genocide, is an egregious act of complicity. And so this brings us to the current political moment in which we are debating the UNHRC resolution and the merits of the UNHRC resolution. And my colleagues have already talked about our utter disappointment with the resolution and with the current position that the international community has taken. And we're of the opinion that unfortunately this resolution moderates and reframes the debate. It seems to distort and dilute the real issue. We're not talking about national oppression anymore. We're not talking about genocide anymore. Somehow the discourse has changed into a problem between religious minorities and human rights violations, which can easily be rectified under a more liberal, democratic Sri Lanka, perhaps under a UNP government with Ranil Wickremesinghe, or maybe Chandrika, who knows. But as far as we are concerned, Rajapaksa is not our primary problem. As far as we are concerned, the Sri Lankan state is the problem. It is that state structure that has committed genocide against our people for over 6 decades. So we're not here to talk about an incremental approach. We're not here to have a discussion or a debate about geopolitics and international order. We are talking about nothing less than the survival of our people today. We are talking about nothing less than the survival of the Tamil nation that is going through a genocide as we speak right now. And so attempting to moderate the debate instead of bringing this system of genocide to an end is indicative of both moral blindness but also political short-sightedness. Prolonging oppression, it's not only unethical, it's pragmatically counterproductive because it perpetuates the conflict that's going on in the island today. Striving for peace divorced of justice is as good as institutionalizing the Tamil nation to the overwhelming state oppression of the Sri Lankan genocidal regime. So today we come here with an urgent appeal for peace. But we know that peace cannot happen without justice. And the time is now for the international community to act. True peace, reconciliation, and perhaps even regional stability can never happen until there is a legitimate, genuine political resolution that addresses the Tamil people's fundamental grievances, but also our cardinal principles of nation, homeland, and self-determination. Our entire history has been a history of compromise, but on these principles, there cannot be even an inch of compromise. And again, I want to reiterate this point. We are interested in peace. We do not want to see the island, perhaps a decade from now, going back down the road to violence. And in order to understand what we're talking about, we have to contextualize the violence of the LTT. The violence of the LTT was a product of state oppression that eventually led to the LTT taking up arms. This same oppression exists today. We want to see this oppression come to an end, and we want to see the international community perhaps rectify some of the mistakes that have happened over the last few years. Thank you very much.
Yes, the next speaker is Andy.
Okay, my name is Andy Higginbottom. I'm a PhD in criminology. My thesis was on crimes of the powerful, and I was a co-prosecutor for the Permanent People's Tribunal, which took place in Bremen in December last year. The PPT, as it's known, found Sri Lanka guilty of structural and ongoing genocide against Tamils. It also found the United States and the United Kingdom guilty of complicity with the ongoing genocide against Tamils. The press conference has been called to discuss the proposed resolution at the 25th session under the terms of solution or problem. Now, if the aim is to normalize the military occupation, to normalize a situation where national self-determination for Elam Tamils is permanently denied, then in my belief the US and UK proposal is part of the solution. But it's part of a final solution that would completely destroy the political legitimacy of the cause of Tamil Elam. The importance of the Permanent People Tribunal's judgment is that it establishes a well-informed third opinion in the international public community that is quite distinct from the policies being pursued by both of the two blocks of governments represented at the UNHRC. Alongside the verdict of genocide, the tribunal highlighted the extent of United States and UK complicity in that genocide. It's a vital point given the current role and the current debate about the role of the two major Western powers. So my question would be, not only can Tamils trust the Sri Lankan state and government, for which I think the answer is very clear, what we are discussing is, can Elam Tamils trust the United Kingdom and the United States? I want to highlight today the deep and strategic military commitment of the United Kingdom, that's my country, to the Sri Lankan state and its genocidal policies. British complicity with Ceylon and then Sri Lanka after 1948 is rooted in an imperial strategy and the twofold aspect of the island's position as a counterweight to radical nationalism in India and the subcontinent, and above all for the British, its critical location and its naval capacity in controlling the sea lanes of the Indian Ocean. Tamils may not sit on oil, but they sit in an ocean across which oil is transported. The spigot of the world's oil in the Middle East passes by the island of Ceylon or Sri Lanka. And this has been known throughout the 20th century by the British. To cite but one example, Winston Churchill remarked about the battle which the British fought to keep the Japanese out of Ceylon, that this was probably one of the decisive battles of the Second World War. Because had the Japanese won, this was back in 1942, they would have been able to connect up with the German forces in Egypt, and in other words, they would have been able to deny permanently access to the world's oil even at that stage. So from the perspective of British interests, we are always needing to bear in mind location, location, location. It is about a strategic and imperial interest. That's what over-determines how the British see the internal situation, and that's why they have always and consistently supported the Sri Lankan state as an instrument of repression internally to ensure external stability. For example, and this is a quote I'm going to give you, the research we're now doing is largely but not entirely based on documents that become available under the 30-year rule in British previously secret documents. In 1947, the 3 UK military chiefs, that's Army, Navy and Air Force, issued a briefing to the UK government in the midst of negotiations about independence. And the 3 military chiefs urged the British government, Labour at the time, to make a commitment that it would, quote, introduce forces and take action as necessary to defend our interests. And the whole history up to and including 2009 has been within that same strategic pattern. There's been a programmatic involvement of the British military, secret service, top politicians, top civil servants, top police officers in training, equipping and directing the forces of the Sri Lankan state to eliminate through counterinsurgency strategies and methods any internal threats to the United States. If we take, for example, intelligence, this is operated at the very highest level. Public documents show that at least 3 times in the 1970s alone, the British intervened at the very highest level to support and provide intelligence to the Sri Lankan armed forces. If we move on to the 1980s, in particular the role of special operations units, and there's a company which you may have heard of called Kini Mini Services, which provided hands-on training to the Sri Lankan state to operate and kill Tamils. There is now published an autobiography of one person who calls himself Tim Smith, I'm not sure if that's his real name, who boasts that he was a helicopter hands-on trainer for the Sri Lankan Armed Forces. In 1986, he says in his autobiography, within 5 months, he killed 152 Elam Tamils, and that's at the point at which he stopped counting. There were 35 such trainers, hands-on killers of Kini Mini Services in Sri Lanka, working with the Sri Lankan Armed Forces at that time. Obviously, the advantage to the British government of this special operations being privatised, it gives them some degree of deniability. But what the internal documents show is this is part of a deliberate strategy. The outsourcing was precisely to make a plausible argument of not being responsible. What is absolutely clear, and this is a point that was raised in a long time ago, long before our research, by Sivaram,
he pointed out how consistently the UK state, and in particular the UK military, has been involved in training the upper echelons of the Sri Lankan military. This is not coincidental or contingent. This has been going on now for 50 years. Okay? For example, in the last generation, you will find, if you are care to look, that General John S. Field, I beg your pardon, he was a Colonel, John S. Field, was the second in command of Sri Lankan Army Command and Staff College that trained the then Lieutenant Colonel Kamal Gunaratne in 1997-98. Those of you who know the situation in Sri Lanka will know that this same officer in the Sri Lankan Army became a general and was the commander of the 53rd Division of the Sri Lankan Army in 2009, and is attributed, and this is an allegation of a war crime, absolutely, against him, that he directed the killing of Elam Tamil prisoners, including journalist Isaiah Priya and the LTT leader's son, Balachandran, 12-year-old boy. So what we have is the ultimate commander in the field, the killing fields in May 2009, directly trained by the British. The UK government banned the LTTE in 2001 just as the Sri Lankan government was being obliged to de facto recognise parity with it in the negotiations that started in 2002. It was at that time, at that very time, that the United Kingdom began an intensive lobbying campaign to get the LTTE also banned in Europe, which succeeded but not until 2006. So in other words, during the entire peace process, the UK was using its diplomatic effort in order to get the LTTE banned. And then also in this period, it was directly involved with the United States in a programmatic structural review of the Sri Lankan armed forces, which recommended the continuation of special operations against Tamil civilians. In other words, in the midst of peace, the British were directly involved in prosecuting further war against Elam Tamils. And this came right from the very top of the British state. In 2001, the United Kingdom set up a special security unit which was to directly advise the Sri Lankan military in a range of matters. And in 2007, once again, there was this semi-privatisation unit set up, this time called Libra, which was to concentrate on intelligence matters. There have been a series of training programmes by senior members of the Scottish Police, of the Northern Irish Police, to the Sri Lankan Police, immediately before and indeed since the massacres of May 2009. The UK is not only directly involved in blocking international support for the Elam Tamil cause by denying parity to the LTTE, it was involved in directly blocking every attempt to avert the human tragedy of May 2009. The UK's permanent representative at the United Nations, a man called Sir John Sawyers, who was at that time the permanent representative to the UN, stopped any Security Council discussion about the crisis in Sri Lanka in February 2009. And this was the exact point, as we know very well from the Petrie report, that the UN officers were raising massive alerts inside the organisation about the impending massacre. It was the UK that stopped the Security Council from discussing that report, those reports openly. So it wasn't just an internal institutional failing of the UN, it was a deliberate policy of the UK government to allow a discussion that may have averted the massacre. Sir John Sawyers has, since his appointment as UK representative of the UN, has since been subsequently appointed head of MI6, which is one of the two major intelligence institutions of my country. In conclusion, the UK government is trying to present the situation as post-conflict. Its strategy is to stall and give the Sri Lankan state time to normalise the military occupation of the north and east of the island. We are now in the phase of cover-up of the genocide. How can you hide a genocide in plain sight? We are not only witnessing a genocide as a social process, which is exactly the determination which the Bremen Tribunal came to, but genocide as a practice of international diplomacy. The current US and UK position is a maneuver to delay and ultimately avoid a genuine international independent inquiry. In my opinion, in my view, public opinion should be demanding the immediate withdrawal of Sri Lankan troops from the military from the north and east of Sri Lanka, and an inquiry into the genocide of Tamils that cannot include any of the major powers, the UK and the US, but also India and China, that are in their different ways complicit with the genocide. Thank you.
I have to remind people that after the speakers, there's only 2 speakers more. After the speakers, there will be time for people to ask any kind of questions you like. Yeah, it's completely free. So the next speaker is it's Bhashana. You have to introduce yourself, Bhashana. Remember.
My name is Bhashana Abewardana. I'm a Sinhalese and a journalist now living in exile. And I have been the former editor of the Hiru newspaper, which was a Sinhalese weekly published in Sri Lanka. And since 2006, I have been living in Germany as a political refugee due to the work-related persecution in Sri Lanka. And I have to rush through most of the facts that I have prepared because of the, shortage of time, and so I will leave more time for the, for the discussion if we have some time at the end of the presentations. And so, because most of the things I wanted to discuss, it has been already said by many others, and so I will just point out some of the facts that has been already emphasized by Mr. Ponnambalam, Guru Gabaran, and the other speakers as well. So it's basically my point is to highlight, to point out the fact why now in Geneva now we see what we see at the moment. There's a I would like to term it as a Bush formula. The Bush formula is either you are with us or against us. So the resolution to Geneva has created a situation where everybody is being pushed into a position either to support the resolution or to oppose the resolution. And why such a simplification is necessary. This is what we need to understand, because if we are really interested to understand what are the poles or the real polarization, what is the genuine polarization as far as the Tamils are concerned. The genuine polarization has already been clearly and precisely emphasized by Mr. Ponnambalam as well as Mr. Gurubaran, who came from the ground, highlighting the fact that in September 2013, when the Northern Provincial Council elections were held, the election manifesto put forward by the Tamil National Alliance is what the Tamils voted for. And on one side you get the aspirations, the collective Tamil national aspirations reflected in the election manifesto formulated by presented by the Tamil National Alliance during the Northern Provincial Council elections. And at the other end of the pole, you get the position of the Sri Lankan state, which is not even willing to discuss the relevance or the importance or the relevance of the 13th Amendment, which is looking forward even to cut off most of the provisions that is being granted through 13th Amendment. So this is the real polarization. So the problem here is why this polarization is not reflected in Geneva. Instead, what we see from the 2012 resolution, what we see, on one side you have a resolution which asks the Sri Lankan government to implement recommendations put forward by its own commission. And on the other side, people who oppose it. So they are basically asking, either you should support the recommendations put forward by the government-appointed commission, or you should oppose it. But at the end of the day, what happens, whether you support it or not, you end up by legitimizing the Sri Lankan government and the state of Sri Lanka and their recommendations. That's what it is basically. I mean, that's what the polarization currently being upheld by many, either willingly or unwillingly, knowingly or unknowingly. This is what put forward, and why it should be, because normally we all know it gives the impression that there are only two sides, there are only two ways you can understand. But when you listen to the two sides, you immediately understand and realize that there are more sides to the story. And when you try to emphasize the other sides to the story, you end up by becoming a spoiler. So this is what actually, this is the way to conceal the magnitude of the crimes that has been committed in Sri Lanka, and that is being committed at this right moment. And this concealing need to be understood not in the heads of the people who are supporting it. We need to understand the big picture of the Sri Lankan conflict long before Mullawaikala outcome happened. So the important thing is, I mean, Mullawaikala is just a culmination of structural factors that, I mean, that happened throughout the past history. Mullawaikala is not just one moment where 40,000 or 50,000 or 70,000 people died. It is just the culmination of structural factors. And therefore it is not collateral, it is not actions taken by some unruly elements inside the Sri Lankan state military, which is being, I mean, which is being called. Because if we are going to accept it as just as war crimes and crimes against humanity, at the end of the day, we will see some of the soldiers will be sacrificed by the Sri Lankan state and by the international actors who have supported the Sri Lankan state throughout the past process, to punish them and point the fingers at them, saying that you actually violated the disciplines that have been taught, that have been, you know, forced, that has been put in place, and therefore that small number of soldiers will be punished, or sacrificed and punished for the crimes that have been committed. But the thing is, Mullawaikala is the culmination of a long structural process, and it still continues. And having said that, one of the important things that we need to understand the present situation is to understand why did the peace process, how did it come into being? How did the peace process or the negotiations during 2002 to 2006, how did it come into place? What was the reasons that made it possible, and what made it inevitable? And the reasons that made the peace process inevitable was the structural balance that was created between the Sri Lankan state and the Tamil national resistance. That is what made, it is not because the Norwegians were involved and running up and down talking to Sri Lankan government and the Tamil Tigers, and it is not because Ranil Wickremesinghe had a special interest towards, I mean, the then Prime Minister had special interest to create peace between his own Sinhalese and the Tamils. Nothing to do with that. Actually, it is because the ground reality made it impossible for anyone, locally or internationally, to avoid, ignore the balance that was created throughout the war, which started from 1995 and lasted up till 2001. So the structural balance was a military balance. It's a politico-military balance. The politico-military balance ensured that the only way to move forward to the Sri Lankan state, the international powers who are backing the Sri Lankan state, just as Dr. Higginbottom explained, the only way to move forward is to negotiate with the Tamil resistance, negotiate with the Tamil movement, and come to an agreement or compromise with the aspirations of the Tamil people. And how do you destroy this? You destroy this by creating an imbalance between the powers that ensured the peace process. You create an imbalance, you destroy the balance that ensured the peace process. And how do you do that? You do that by enhancing one side, enhancing the military capabilities of one side of the conflict, while delegitimizing the aspirations of the other side. That is how you do it. And as we know, as we all know, now let me quickly quote one thing that I have prepared, which it is just the tip of the iceberg. Now, the Sri Lankan peace process, according to the peace process, it started, the first peace talk, the first round of peace talks started in September 2002. And exactly coinciding with this time period, there was a 26-member delegation, a military delegation, came from the US Pacific Command to Sri Lanka to carry out, to stay in Sri Lanka for 1 month and to carry out a classified security assessment. And referring to this security assessment which was being carried out at that moment, on the just okay. This was, I mean, the one of the, I mean, according to the WikiLeaks cables, there was a one declassified document, I mean, the classified document, which I will read. And this is what the Colombo embassy writes to Washington, heads of Washington. And this is after looking at the Sri Lankan military's capabilities and what made them weaker than the Tamil movement. Now the Colombo embassy, US embassy, writes to Washington like this. I mean, this is the way they identified the weaknesses of the Sri Lankan state. According to the cable, dated 25th of October 2002, it says, over the past several weeks, three separate DOD assessments, that is Defense Department assessment teams, have visited Sri Lanka. National Defense University, which looked at military education, Pacific Command, which assessed operational and equipment matters, and defense policy experts, which evaluated doctrinal issues. Although we await submission of the team's final reports, dominant themes have emerged from the preliminary assessment as they were briefed by the to the Colombo embassy. And this is what it says. These are the preliminary assessment. The government of Sri Lanka has no national security or national military strategy. Said by whom? Not by Sri Lankan military experts, but by the United States. The military has pursued a war-fighting strategy almost devoid of accurate, real-time tactical intelligence. 3, widespread recognition exists that the Sri Lankan military has followed outdated doctrines and a defensive strategy. I emphasize the word defensive strategy, which has been seen as a weakness. So when you criticize for adopting a defensive strategy, then the military becomes offensive, and we get Mullivaikkal in 2009. And it says, including maritime interdiction, for which it is ill-equipped and undermanned. And the last, the military has been severely handicapped by the lack of merit-based personnel system and by very limited professional education opportunities. During these 4 years, and as a result of this assessment, it also emphasized the importance. I mean, they went to the eastern part of the country and they emphasized the importance of changing some of the ground realities. And which one of the important things that they pointed out, which I will. Can you see it? Yeah. Yeah, it's connected. Yeah. Okay, I think I will read it anyway, even though we cannot see it. I will.
It's coming.
It's coming, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So. This is a quotation from this specific classified report, which was which some parts of the report got leaked out in 2002, and it was published in some of the Colombo-based newspapers, which says the most important base for the Sri Lankan military, for Sri Lankan Navy, is without question the Trincomalee Harbour. Currently, the LTT controls the southern portion of the harbour. The Sri Lankan Defence Force must secure the land area. Without Trincomalee Harbour, the ability to prosecute war would detrimentally be affected. Now, the important thing about this recommendation is when you look at the timeline. Now, this was said in 2002 November in the final report, which has been mentioned in the WikiLeaks cable. And in 2006, when the war started, it exactly started from this place. Just exactly going according to the plan, the whole war started from the southern portion of the Trincomalee Harbour as the Sri Lankan military forces marched into the area that was controlled by the LTT, and which created and which triggered a full-scale war that ended from Mullivaikkal. So the thing is, if it is a structural issue that we are talking about, there's a need to understand why there's, lack of willingness or ignorance or negligence, some kind of disregard to important fact to address the structural issues through a resolution. Mulliwaikal, if it is a result of a structural, the policies of the state structure that has been, long before the current regime came into power, Tamils have been victims of this structural policy that targeted to dismantle the Tamil national, the collective national life of the Tamil people. So if that is not being addressed in any resolution, that we should need to find out why it is being deliberately ignored. And the reason is the structural responsibility of the Sri Lankan state has always been backed by international powers, as it is being exposed by this one simple example. When there was a balance between the state and the Tamil resistance, which compels them to talk to each other and to find a feasible solution, then the third factors come in and create a imbalance between these two forces. At the end of the day, what happens is we get Mulliwaikal, and then there's a reason why they should conceal it, because the imbalance that made Mulliwaikal possible could not have been made without the support of the external powers. So if the same external powers are going to get involved in bringing resolutions, they should make sure that the structural issues will not be addressed through any resolution. And we get the third resolution on Sri Lanka, which emphasizes the relevance of the 13th Amendment, which has been actually questioned, which has been put into challenge by the Tamil National Alliance election mandate in just 1 year before, and which got a clear mandate from the Sri Lankan, which got a clear mandate from the Tamil people who are living in the northern province to say that they deny it. So in that sense, the whole problem of the Sri Lankan issue cannot be understood as a issue that is confined to a remote island where there are two physically identical two communities fighting each other for 100, 200 years. It is not something like that. It is something more than that. And to understand more than that, we need to understand the intentions not only of the Sri Lankan state, not only of the Tamil people, Tamil nation, but it is important to understand the intentions of the forces that have been involved in Sri Lanka throughout the war, even before the war started, and throughout the war, and during the last 5 years, and who are behind the resolution. And if the resolution is going to impose, if it is going to force on us to take one side, instead of taking one side and walking into the trap, we have every right to expose the third or the fourth or the fifth aspect to it. Because it's a multidimensional issue, and we should not accept this oversimplified interpretation of the current state of the affairs in Sri Lanka. So in that sense, having emphasized that, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to talk about, to share my opinions about the current situation, and I would more than welcome anyone to ask questions about what I have said. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I would also like to thank Bhasan for appearing, even though he is